Today we'll be discussing about clustering and I have a high level overview of the same. So what is clustering? If multiple application servers are running in tandem and are pointing to the same database, then that is known as clustering. In simple terms, you can effectively conceptualize it as one install of decisions, but in actuality, there are multiple application servers that are working together against the same database. And the most common configuration in terms of implementation is to have a load balancer that will sit in front of two decision servers and distribute work to those servers. Let's go ahead. And why do we use a clustered environment? The major reason is high availability. And high availability configurations helps in removing any single point of failure in a process by creating a cluster of at least two application servers. So please keep in mind that it also requires that the customer configures and maintains a load balancer that can route traffic and periodically run health checkups on the application servers. And we also recommend using a clustered SQL environment for the database to prevent any database failures from interrupting the services. And usually the recommended settings for application servers is by constructing an active-active cluster, and that also should contain a geographic separation. And the next reason is load balancing. And balancers are commonly deployed when multiple application servers are being used with decisions. Here, the load balancer acts as a primary point of contact so that all of the application servers looks the same to any end user. So here, the load balancer will internally route the data to each of the servers in the cluster based on the criteria configured in the settings. And next is scalability. And usually scalability means that having multiple application servers will help you to add more resources to either nodes to provide more processing power. For example, if it's the month end, then we could need more processing capacity as in compared to any other normal working day. In that case, it's easy for us to add any additional computing resources of power. Now we'll look at some of the commonly used terminologies. So clustering is basically of two types. One is of application, another one is database. So depending upon the layer in which we are doing the clustering. And application clustering refers to making multiple computing servers act as a single system that we've already seen in the earlier slides. And what is its use? And it's used for distributing user load across geographies so that the response time and latency can be minimized by running operations on servers that are nearest to the users. And you can also limit the number of critical processes that are being run on a server. And next, database clustering. We do have database clustering for high availability. You can configure them. If one SQL server fails, then the other one can pick up to replicate the production server. And just to reiterate again, both application clustering and database clustering are different concepts. So moving forward, we'll be discussing about the application clustering and the required settings to configure it. Next is load balancing. So as discussed in last slide, load balancers are used to distribute requests over multiple computing resources based on the configured settings, so that for users, there is no difference in terms of experience, irrespective of the server resource that sends the response. In decisions, load balancers are configured with sticky sessions, since the server that the user connects to needs to be same throughout the session. So next, this is an overview of a load balancing cluster at an eye level. So here each of the server have a shared cache updates, and there's also a caller service that automatically shares the information between all the application servers about the execution of flows, rules, services, etc. So in the event of a failure, the other servers can use this cache updates and pick up the data from database and continue with the processing. And just want to highlight that we also have a team of architects that can help you with all the details and setting up these clusters. On the right side, we have the most common setup that the customers use, a replication of what is there on the left side. And here, the application servers are typically pointing to a single SQL server. So if you're setting up clustering on the database side, this also needs to be uh, duplicated. So now we will briefly look at the configuration of a clustered environment. So we'll see at a high level, what are the parameters that needs to be considered while setting up a clustered environment. Here you can see this snapshot shows the requirements or the prerequisites for a self-hosted cluster. It details the requirements such as the .NET framework, the SQL Server, the time zone settings, Redis server, load balancer, and sticky sessions requirements, etc. Similarly, if you're planning to host it through IIS, the second snapshot highlights the requirements for that setup. And we also have a very detailed documentation explaining this step-by-step procedure with snapshots. I'll show you how we can quickly access it through the decisions documentation site. Let me navigate to the documentation site. So you can visit documentation.decisions.com and select the version that you want the information about. Since here we are discussing about the version 8, I'm leaving it as it is. In the search bar, we can type the topic that we need details about. I'm typing in clustering. You can see a drop down with all the related articles or the documentation links. I'll click on about clustering. So in the left navigation pane, you can see the tree architecture, and you can see the grouping of this topic across the categories. And we are interested in setting up a cluster. I'll click on the setting up a cluster. Here you can notice the details, the prerequisites, and the step-by-step method with all the screenshots. So in this way, you can access decisions documentation site for further details, not only about clustering, any other topic that you want to know more about, you can visit the documentation site. So we have some good examples and projects that will help you to improve your understanding. So let's go back to the slides. So towards the end, we'll look at some of the configuration in the slides. For now, let's see from an admin perspective, what are some of the logs that they can use for maintenance related activities and day-to-day operations. So here is a screenshot of a log related to messaging and caching between these servers. So here this snapshot shows that the nodes are not listening to each other. In the error log screenshot, you can observe that there is no endpoint listening at the mentioned URL service. And the reason might be because of incorrect address. And error message on these lines typically indicate that one of the servers, that is in this case 10.0.0.8, could be down. So one way to check is to navigate to this service and see if it's working. And we also have a feature called cluster logs. We can enable it to see all the communication information at debug level. That is, if both these servers are connected, the log will have some information like, yes, the servers are connected, etc. that we can use for troubleshooting purposes. I'll go to the next slide. Here is the storage log. So this is another log that talks about the shared storage. And please keep in mind that all the application servers have to share the file data. So we need to ensure that they point to the correct directory path. And this screenshot highlights that part of the directory path could not be located. So as part of maintenance, admins will also have access to these storage logs. Let's go ahead. So this is regarding health checkups. So under system administration, under servers, we can find the report of all the nodes in a cluster and information about them. We can find the IP address, whether they are alive or part of the cluster, if they can run specific scheduled jobs, and when was the last time that the servers were checked in. And you also can define queues of work in your cache that can be routed to specific servers. That basically means that you can configure an independent node to work only for a specific queue. It'll run only for the rules, flows, etc. that are configured in that queue. And now for illustration purpose, I have used a demo server screenshot. In a cluster environment, you can find different servers and IP address that are part of the cluster. Ahead with some assumptions that the load balancer is already set up. We have the Redis server information, address, etc. And we also have decided the shared storage path, and all of the nodes are configured properly. And now, firstly, to set up a cluster, we need to enable the clustering for the server. So let's switch to the studio and see how it can be done. So here we are in the Decision Studio. This is my local environment. We can navigate to System, and under this Settings, I'm clicking on Settings. Then you can see something called as Clustering Settings. And here we have the checkbox to turn on clustering. So we can turn on the clustering, enter the Redis information, and save this. So here, if you're pointed to the same database, we can also see how other applications are doing. You can right click on clustering settings and select check peers. This will show you the status of all servers. This will show you the status of all servers. So now let's look at how to change the shared file storage location. So for that, we need to access the settings.xml file on the Decisions Services Manager. So I already have my folder opened up. Here you can see I've navigated to the Decision Services Manager, and I'm opening the settings.xml file. Here we need to check for this file storage location. We can do a quick check and enter the location that we want all the servers to share. And we also have to ensure that it is permissioned appropriately. So this same change, you can also do it from the installer, the Decisions installer, by selecting Edit Settings button from the installation wizard. So let's go back to the slides. So we have covered the high-level configuration of the servers. And once this is configured, then we have the options to configure high availability, how the cluster runs, what is the primary job server, and how to set it up. So like I showed you, there is a detailed documentation that'll help you to go through it step by step. And thank you for listening to this session.